Hey there, folks. Welcome to another episode of Delta Deep with your host, Roscoe. Before we dive into the show, I've got a little update on the situation with our dear mayor, Max Callahan. Seems like he's been putting the squeeze on me even harder lately. I even received a not-so-friendly call from one of his cronies. Can't say exactly what was said, but it sure wasn't pretty, and I've noticed more local PD cruising around my street than usual. But don't you worry, I'll keep fighting the good fight against old Mayor Max. Now, let's move on to this week's show. It's the final week of our River Rogue series, and we'll be wrapping it up with one last listener-submitted story about those notorious pirates. I think you'll enjoy how we send them off. And for my personal tale of the week, I'll be taking you back to the 70s when I was living in Texas. I had a strange encounter out in the wilderness that I'll never forget. Let's just say it was one of those experiences that make you believe there's more to this world than meets the eye. But you'll have to wait and see what I mean. So grab yourself a drink, settle in, and let's get this show on the road. All right, dear listeners, now for the final River Rogue story that I've been saving for you all. This is the one that really caught my attention and led me down the path of researching and sharing these River Rogues tales with you over the past few weeks. So this story comes from a listener named Pat, who claims to be a direct descendant of one of the original River Rogues. Pat stumbled upon an old journal that belonged to their great-great-grandfather, which contained a startling revelation. For those of y'all who tuned in last week, this might be old news, but it turns out that there was a major betrayal within the ranks of the River Rogues, leading to their ultimate downfall. Pat's great-great-grandfather, Renard, it seems, was one of the few who remained loyal to the crew. Before his death, he wrote down the story of the betrayal and the resulting curse that has haunted his family line for generations. According to the journal, the spirits of the betrayed River Rogues are restless, seeking vengeance on the descendants of those who wronged them. And Pat's family has been on the receiving end of that vengeance for over a century. The curse, as it turns out, seemed to have skipped Renard, but it has mercilessly targeted all his male descendants. The first victim of this dreadful curse was Pat's great-grandfather, who met a grisly fate. One day, while working in a sawmill, a freak accident occurred. A chain holding a heavy log snapped, causing the log to swing wildly through the air. Tragically, it struck Pat's great-grandfather, killing him instantly. Eyewitnesses claim that they heard ghostly laughter echoing through the sawmill right after the accident. Then Pat's grandfather suffered an equally horrifying death. He was an avid fisherman, and one day he decided to go out on the river alone. Hours later, his boat was found drifting down the river, empty. His lifeless body was discovered a few days later, tangled in fishing nets with dozens of fish hooks embedded in his flesh. It seems that the curse has spared no male descendant in Pat's family, and each death has been more gruesome than the last. One of Pat's uncles, desperate to escape the curse, isolated himself from society, hoping that by avoiding the outside world he could dodge his family's dreadful fate. And he lived deep in the woods, miles away from any other human being. For years he managed to survive on his own, growing increasingly paranoid and reclusive. But one day, a group of hikers stumbled upon his cabin. They found the door wide open and his belongings scattered everywhere. The uncle had vanished without a trace. Weeks later, his body was discovered deep in the woods, half buried in a pile of leaves. The cause of death was a single, unexplainable bite mark on his neck, as if some unknown creature had taken his life. The curse had found him despite his best efforts to escape it. The other uncles suffered similarly inexplicable deaths. One was found crushed beneath a toppled bookshelf in his own home, and another was discovered with his limbs twisted in impossible angles, as if some unseen force had bent and broken his body. And the curse of the River Rogues seemed to have no limits, reaching out to claim each male descendant with a brutal and chilling efficiency. Pat's father, aware of the family's terrible history, tried his best to live a normal life, hoping to be the one to break the cycle of the curse. For many years, it seemed like he might just escape it. He raised a family, built a successful career, and reached old age without any sign of the curse's dark touch. It appeared as if the terrifying family legacy might have finally come to an end, but just as everyone began to breathe a sigh of relief, tragedy struck once more. Pat's father, while out for a walk one day, suddenly collapsed in the street. No one could figure out why. He was in perfect health, and there was no visible injury or sign of any attack. It was as if the curse had reached out and snuffed the life from him without leaving a mark. Even in his final years, the curse had found a way to claim him. As I wrapped up Pat's chilling tale of the River Rogue's curse, I couldn't help but wonder a bit. Now, Pat, is your name short for Patricia or Patrick? Either way, stay safe out there, buddy. Well, folks, it's time to move on to our next segment, Roscoe's Weekly Tale. But before we do that, I've got some unfortunate news. Our tape machine is still on the fritz, so there won't be a music segment this week. I know, it's a bummer, but we'll get it sorted out soon enough. Also, I hate to say it, but we won't be having a call-in segment this week either. I've got to be up bright and early tomorrow morning to continue fighting the good fight. You know how it is. Sometimes you've got to make sacrifices to keep pushing forward. Anyways, we'll be right back. Stay tuned, folks. So let me set the scene for y'all. Back in the 70s, I was living in the beautiful hill country of Leon County, Texas. I was a young man back then, full of energy and always looking for a new adventure. At the time, I was working for a small construction company, and we were building a new house on the outskirts of town. One weekend, I decided to take a little break from the job and spend some time exploring the surrounding area. I'd heard from some of the locals that there were some interesting trails and scenic spots in the hills, so I figured it'd be a great way to unwind and enjoy nature. Little did I know that my little excursion would lead to a bizarre and unforgettable encounter. I packed up my camping gear, grabbed my fishing pole, and headed out towards the Bowski River, which was a popular fishing spot in the area. I spent the day fishing, taking in the peaceful sounds of the flowing water and the chirping of the birds. I even managed to catch a couple of decent-sized catfish that I planned to cook up for dinner later on. As the sun began to set, I made my way back to my campsite, feeling pretty good about the day I'd had. But when I got back to the site, I noticed something odd. There were shoe prints all around my camp that definitely weren't mine. They seemed to be circling my tent and belongings, almost as if someone had been snooping around while I was away. At first, I thought maybe it was just another camper who'd stumbled upon my site by accident, but there was something about the way the prints were laid out that made me uneasy. It looked like whoever had been there had taken their time examining my stuff and maybe even watching me from a distance. Well, folks, that night, I crawled into my tent, feeling somewhat uneasy, but thinking I'd be okay since I had my trusty shotgun nearby for protection. You see, I had brought it along because I'd heard there were some wild hogs in the area, and I wanted to make sure I was safe from any potential encounters with them. As I lay in my tent trying to get some sleep, I was awoken by the sound of birds suddenly taking off in a panic. Startled, I reached for my shotgun, only to realize that it wasn't there. My heart sank as it dawned on me that I'd left it in my truck, my brand new '78 Power Wagon, which was parked a short distance away from the campsite. Feeling vulnerable and on edge, I carefully and quietly snuck out of my tent, doing my best not to make any noise as I made my way towards the truck. When I finally reached it and glanced at the clock inside, I saw that it was around 3 a.m., the so-called witching hour. My unease only grew, but I knew I needed my shotgun to feel safer in this situation. So I pushed on. I grabbed my shotgun from the truck, and feeling a little more secure, I took a moment to scan my surroundings. That's when I noticed something in the moonlight, a figure standing at a distance watching me. My heart raced as I tried to make out who or what it was, but the darkness made it difficult to discern any details. There was just this overwhelming sense of being observed by someone or something that shouldn't have been there. With my shotgun in hand, I cautiously called out, "Who's there? What do you want?" But there was no response. The figure remained still, as if taunting me. I could feel a cold shiver run down my spine, and I knew I had to find out what was going on, but not before I made sure I was ready for anything. And with that, folks, we're going to take a short break. When we return, I'll tell you what happened next in this chilling encounter deep in the heart of the Texas Hill Country. So don't you go anywhere. Stay tuned to Delta Deep with Roscoe. When we last left off, I was just about to investigate the mysterious figure that had been watching me from a distance. I grabbed a flashlight from my truck and flicked it on, only to find that the figure had vanished. My heart pounding, I cautiously approached the area where the figure had been standing. To my amazement, there were shoe prints right where it had been, but there were no other prints leading to or away from that spot. It was as if the person or thing had simply appeared and disappeared without a trace. I felt a shudder of fear run through me, and I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I rushed back to my campsite, hastily grabbing everything I could carry, and sprinted back to my truck. Throwing my belongings in the back, I jumped in and turned the key, my hands shaking as the engine roared to life. I didn't waste a second, hitting the gas and tearing out of there as fast as my 78 Power Wagon could take me. I didn't stop until I was miles away, finally pulling over at a rest stop to catch my breath and try to process what had just happened. As I sat there, still shaking from the adrenaline, I couldn't help but wonder what I had encountered that night, who or what had been watching me, and how could it have left those prints without any sign of coming or going? The questions swirled in my mind, but I knew I would never find the answers. All I could do was count myself lucky to have escaped whatever it was that had been lurking in the darkness of the Texas Hill Country. Now, I mentioned this on a couple of previous shows, but my grandfather had left me a family pocket watch, a beautiful antique heirloom that I cherished dearly. In the chaos of my escape from the campsite the previous night, I realized with a sinking feeling that I had left it behind. I knew I couldn't just abandon it there. So, with a heavy heart, I made the decision to go back the next day and search for it. As I arrived at the campsite, I was greeted by a scene of destruction. Everything I had left behind was torn apart or smashed as if something had taken out its frustration on my belongings. My heart raced as I began the search for my pocket watch, fearing the worst. I combed through the debris for what felt like hours, but the watch was nowhere to be found. Defeated, I trudged back to my truck, dreading the thought of telling my grandmother that I had lost my late grandpa's watch. As I approached the vehicle, I noticed something strange. My truck door was wide open. I could have sworn I had locked it when I left, but there it was, gaping like an invitation. With a sense of unease, I cautiously approached and peered inside. There, to my shock and relief, was the pocket watch sitting right on the driver's seat. How it had gotten there that I couldn't explain, but I wasn't about to question my good fortune. I grabbed the watch, locked the truck, and wasted no time in getting as far away from that campsite as I could. I knew I'd never return to that part of the county, and though I eventually figured out what, or more accurately, who was out there that night, that's a story for another time. The memories of those strange events still linger in my mind, serving as a reminder of the unexplained mysteries that can be found in the most unexpected places. Well, folks, that's all we have for you tonight on Delta Deep with Roscoe. I apologize if these last couple of episodes have been uploading late. My video editor's college semester is wrapping up, and he's been pretty busy, but we'll do our best to get back on track as soon as possible. Thank you all for tuning in, and be sure to join us next week for more tales, mysteries, and adventures. Until then, this is Roscoe signing off. Y'all take care and keep exploring the depths of the unknown. Good night.